Okay, welcome back to another study in our time in the Bible. We're returning to our study of what I call grave concerns, and we've been looking at the afterlife of the immaterial part of man. Spent a lot of time in the Old Testament looking at things, and it seems that the while resurrection was known and many talked about it, it was not well developed as it is in the New Testament. There wasn't just enough information to put together what we know today. But with the coming of the New Testament, particularly with the teaching of Jesus Christ, things of the Apostle Paul, and what we know from the book of Revelation, particularly chapter 20, interesting part of scripture there, lining that up with the book of Daniel, we can really start putting together uh, a good understanding of what the Lord does with the immaterial part of man. And from that study, we see what he does with the material part of man as well, as time progresses and coming up to the kingdom and after the kingdom to eternal state. So, what is Hades or Sheol like? That is the abode of the dead. We see that we've seen it mostly from the Old Testament point of view to this point, and we have to ask the question: are the just and the unjust in the same place? Are they mixed together? Uh, are those in Sheol aware of their existence? Are they in some? Used to be this uh, group out there that was teaching soul sleep. Is that what it's like? I don't think so. We'll see from Scripture that it's not that the case. Man is not sleeping. Man is fully aware of that, and we'll see that as we go through Scripture, and particularly with the New Testament writing. Old Testament saints, again, as I mentioned, did not seem to have a full understanding because they couldn't. It was not all given yet. The Lord had not revealed it because Scripture is progressive and unfolding, and the Lord had a lot more to say as time went on. And so the record of Jesus Christ when he came and taught in his earthly ministry, his incarnation, gives us a lot of insight, and we're going to spend a little time today in that of things that Jesus taught will really open our eyes and give us a better understanding of some of these locations. And particularly, we're going to see things that Jesus did speak of. Now, the English word is hell, but that's actually Hades. We see it four times in the Gospels, but it's actually three times because there are two verses that are actually repeating the same event here. But we see that Jesus did speak of Hades, and it's usually when he spoke of Hades, it was of, I would say, in a sense of a judgment, not just of the abode of the dead, but he was speaking of the negative side of it. And let me play this one here from, I think this is from, let's get my reference here, Capernaum, he's speaking here, and this is in Luke 10:15. Let me play that one. I'm going to have Hades in the end of it because I put that in as well.
And thou, Capernaum, which art exalted to heaven, shalt be thrust down to hell Hades.
Okay, the King James Version uses the word hell, but the word in the Greek there is Hades, and that's what Jesus used. And he used the same thing again when he's speaking about the ministry of Peter in chapter 16 of Matthew. Let me play that one as well. He used that word.
And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell Hades shall not prevail against it.
Okay, so he's looking at Hades as being, again, the abode probably of Satan in that situation there as well. So Jesus used that actually only three times in the New Testament and three separate times using that word. Uh, but the most revealing of all of these references appear in Luke chapter 16, which we're not going to cover today because it'll take a lesson all in itself. So I'm going to take this a little bit out of order. I'd like to do chapter 16 here because I think it makes a lot more sense, but it will take almost a whole lesson just to go through that. So in our next lesson, we will look at that, Lord willing. But here we're going to look at chapters 23 as well as 16 in this study, and both of them, Jesus gives us a kind of a window into places that the natural eye cannot see. It's pretty exciting to go and see where he's taking us, and we can, in our mind's eye, experience what it's like to be in Sheol. So, um, and up to this time, we're going to see that when we get to Luke 16, it's going to be, and Jesus spoke of this in other places as well. He talks about eternal fire. Now, in the Old Testament, eternal fire for the condemned was really, really noted. We see fire quite a bit in the Old Testament. The Lord appears in fire a lot. You see his, the Shekinah glory. So we see a fire in the Old Testament. We also see fire as judgment in the Old Testament, and that is very common. There's a few places we see it, uh, in particular places, but again, it's usually in the temporal sense, not in the eternal sense. You go through the book of Exodus when the Lord was bringing his people out of Egypt. Fire was very prominent in the judgment on Egypt. Later, when they're in the wilderness in the judgment, we see that when Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus chapter 10 offered strange fire, they were executed by fire. And later, when the complainers were in the desert, uh, the Lord brought fire upon some of them as well. And so we see fire in the Old Testament. It's usually in a physical sense. It's usually um, in the temporal world. But we'll see that Jesus spoke of fire involved with eternal judgment, and I think that is quite a change from the Old Testament. The Old Testament kept it in the physical world, but Jesus brought it to um, the life after death. The Old Testament regularly spoke of fire, but there is little revelation of it included uh, with the afterlife as well. There is one verse in Isaiah, and I think we'll come across it shortly here, that shows this, but normally we don't see fire with eternal judgment included in the Old Testament. But there was some indication of that, and particularly and let's play this verse here because this does come from the book of Isaiah, and this is one of the few places that really shows that.
And they shall go forth, and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me, for their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched. And they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh.
And that brings us pretty close to what Jesus was speaking of in the New Testament, but that was in the very last chapter of Isaiah, and it's a rare example in the Old Testament speaking of fire and judgment. Now, so they could be aware of it, but they did not have the doctrine developed as you see in the New Testament. But with the coming of Jesus in his incarnation, things quite a bit changed. Jesus really taught in a different vein than they were teaching when Jesus came. The scribes and the Pharisees were speaking mostly of the temporal world, of outward activities. But Jesus brought the focus from the temporal, from the outward to the eternal, to what the heart issues that are behind what people were doing, and he brought that into the teaching us of the afterlife as well. That the things that happen in this life, the way people act, what people do, the attitudes can affect your eternal state, what you're going to be like after death. So let's go back a little bit and start looking at some of these things in Scripture. And again, as I mentioned, I'm going to do this out of order. I'm going to go to Luke chapter 23 first here. If you want to follow along in Bibles, Jesus is on the cross here um, with two thieves, one on either side of him, and one of them repents on while he's on the cross. And Jesus has a good conversation with him, and Jesus knows he's saved now, and Jesus says something to him. And let me play this here because it's going to have a number in here, but I'll explain what that is.
Today shalt thou be with me in paradise. G. Greek 3857.
All right, in that passage there, if you use the Strong's, now that's the Strong's number. Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in paradise," and that's a rarely used word in the New Testament. This is the only one I think of three times it's used in the New Testament. We ask the question: is paradise heaven? Or is it somewhere else? I find that the word paradise, as we go through the study here, is not specifically a location, while it is referring to one here. It is a description of a place. Um, and here, Jesus does not mean that he would be in heaven today with the man who repented on the cross. We're going to see in our next lesson when we look at Luke 16 that there's a place in Sheol called, or Hades, same thing. It's called Abraham's bosom. And I'm going to say paradise is associated with that. There are two other places that use the word paradise, and one of them is very helpful to us here is in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 4 and following. Paul talks about a man going up into paradise. And as you follow in the verses after that, you realize that the paradise, he's speaking of the third heaven, the abode of God. So the abode of God in heaven can be called paradise. But here, Jesus wasn't going to heaven at that time. We're going to see from Scripture that he was actually going to Hades. And so he's going to describe that as paradise. Um, so he said, there's one other time it's used in of paradise, a paradise use, and this is from Revelation. I think this is Revelation chapter 2, verse 7. Let me play that to see if I have this right here.
He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God.
So paradise there, in one of the other uses, does appear to be in the heavenly realm, and in maybe the New Jerusalem in heaven. That's looking to the future. So it's actually after the church age. It's going to be that was referring to there, or during the church age it was written. And so as we compare these passages together, I think we see that paradise is not specifically a place, and we use things like this all the time. We can say that I went to Hawaii and it was heavenly. Well, we weren't in heaven, but we use heaven as a descriptive term that we enjoyed being in heaven, and heaven we enjoyed being in Hawaii, and that we compare it to heaven, so you know that we liked it there. And I think Jesus was using the term here, paradise, is uh, the example of what it's going to be like. It's a quality of what it's going to be like there. He's going to be in a place of paradise, a place of comfort and joy, and all his needs met. So he's describing that. But as we go through here, go back to Luke 23, we see that uh, when this man died, he would go to be in paradise. But that was going to be, you have to say, where did Jesus go? Jesus went that at that time after he died. Uh, Jesus goes to the same place that Lazarus went to. We'll see in Luke 16. He went to lower Sheol, but in the good space. And we find that Jesus' body was in the grave from the time of his burial in the tomb, but he was very much alive, and he went to be with the people in Hades, uh, and and that man that was saved on the cross would meet him there. Uh, so let me play another verse here that may put a little light on this as well.
He seeing this before spake of the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in hell, neither his flesh did see corruption.
So the word there, hell, of course, is Hades, and that Peter is speaking of this in his Pentecost speech, and he uses the word Hades here, where Jesus went after he died on the cross, and not paradise, as he doesn't say that, but it in fact is one and the same. He and we'll see this also in this verse here.
He seeing this before spake of the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in hell, neither his flesh did see corruption.
So we see that Christ was not in the lower part of Sheol, but while his body was in the grave, it ended up in this place called Hades. So we see uh, in verse 31 that his soul was in Hades, and this is the same place that he was going that very day with the man who was with him on the cross. Uh, Yet while Jesus' body was in the grave, his spirit ended up in this place called Sheol. So when Jesus said to the when he said to the man who was on the cross near him, he said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." He meant he would be with also he'd be with him in Hades. So this be also we're going to see in Luke 16 that this is also known as Abraham's bosom, and that's where Lazarus will end up in that tale as well. So we see here Jesus is giving us a better insight into where people go when they die and a description, but we're still in Old Testament economy here because when believers die, they were going to Sheol. We'll see a change in that after our next lesson, when after Jesus rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, we see that there's going to be a change with this place called Sheol. We will see a window into Hades. We're going to go into uh, the story in Luke 16. And Jesus really brings us into this abode of the dead, and we get to see what it's like there, how people think and feel. And it's just an amazing account that gives us such a description of the afterlife. There's so much in it to learn. And we'll probably just scratch the surface in there, but I look forward to being there with you in that. So stay tuned for the next lesson and hope to see you there. Thank you for listening in.